Did they pick it up?
Good evening, and welcome to our author series here at UUTC. I'm Jim Hardy. Our guest this evening is the Reverend Dr. Tom Lewis. Tom is a retired Presbyterian minister and now serves as an advisor to the Center for Spiritual Wisdom here in Brevard, North Carolina. He grew up in Baxley, Georgia, and received a BA from Emory University, a Master of Divinity from Columbia Theological Seminary, and a Doctor of Ministry from he received a Master of Divinity from Princeton Theological Seminary and a Doctor of Ministry from Columbia Theological Seminary. Tom has served in many roles throughout his ministerial career, and in 2002 published the book Finding God, Praying the Psalms in Times of Depression, based on his own struggles with depression. The book served as a basis for seminars on depression, which he led across the country. Tom Lewis, it's a pleasure to welcome you to our UUTC Author Series.
Thank you, Jim.
Baxley, Georgia is a town of about 4,000 people, and it sits kind of out there in a very rural area in southeastern Georgia. Tell us about your early life there and the things you feel shaped you and affected your decisions later in life.
Well, how do you know Baxley?
I looked it up.
You looked it up.
I looked it up.
You must have. Nobody's ever been there. Yeah, I grew up in a small town. That's one thing that shaped the rest of my life. It was an agrarian economy. There was agriculture. I worked on a farm. I learned a very strong Protestant work ethic in Baxley, working for my dad. We worked. You show up and you finish. That was the thing. And I went to the Methodist Church, and that didn't seem to ring a lot of bells with me back then, but it did later, and spent a lot of time in scouting. And so those are the main things, I think, that shaped me for later decisions in life.
Did your family encourage church and scouting and all of those things?
Oh, yeah. They were very involved, very involved. My mother was a person of deep faith, and my father was a person of medium faith. Faith, but not deep faith.
Okay.
Yeah, and my dad and my brother have both worked in scouting as leaders, as adult leaders for years and years, and so that was a big part of our family life, was scouting. So.
Did you stay in scouting all through high school?
I went away to school when I was 15, and I got my Eagle Award when I was 14.
Oh,
so
wow.
Just before I went away to school. So
you were pretty young for an Eagle Scout, weren't you?
Yeah, pretty young. Yeah, but I was moving on, so I had to finish it up. So that's one of the things you finish. That's what.
Okay. All right. You didn't start out as a minister. I think you got out of school somewhere in the mid-60s, 64, 65, somewhere in there. Is that about right?
Are you saying 60?
60s, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
You didn't start out in the ministry. You started out in pharmaceuticals.
Right.
How did you get there?
Well, I was not much of a strategic planner back in those days. And I showed up at Emory as a junior, Emory in Atlanta, and I was registering, and they said, "What's your major?" And I said, "Huh?" I didn't even know I had to have a major. I had not given it no thought at all. So I said, "I don't know." And they said, "Well, what do you like?" And I said, "Well, I like biology." "You're a biology major." But that fit really well with pharmaceuticals. It gave me a good background for learning about the pharmaceutical products and the illnesses that they were good for. And I had been selling things all my life, so those two things kind of came together. And the representative who did the hiring for Merck, who is the company I worked for, lived just down the street from Emory. And I went over and sat on his porch in the swing, and we drank iced tea, and that was my interview. So it was great.
So you were calling on doctors to sell Merck pharmaceuticals, is that right?
Yes.
And how long did you do that?
I did it I was with Merck for 17 years, and in that time I was in 7 different jobs. So I started in sales, and I ended up in directing a department in the home office.
And what was the department?
Health Education Liaison. And that doesn't
What did that mean?
What does that mean? That's a good question. We presented educational programs for groups of physicians around the country, and it was a busy program. Spent a lot of money on doing that. But so I stayed there. I had a successful career with Merck, and when I left, they offered me a promotion. So it was really funny. So I felt like I was leaving on good terms.
Why did you leave?
Well, I had another calling. Are you asking me about how did I get into ministry?
Yeah, I am.
That's a good question.
That didn't come about overnight, I'm sure.
No. Well, it was kind of like a bolt of lightning that hit me. I had somewhere along the line I had learned how to plan, and I had a plan for my life, my career, and the plan was to be a district sales manager by the time I was 30. And so when I was 30, I was sent to South Texas as a district sales manager. And I worked there. I had to learn a new way of doing things. It was no longer me doing everything. It was these 14 people that worked for me, what they were doing that counted. And so that was a new kind of thing for me. And I had always believed in the American dream, that if you work hard and what's the expression, keep your nose to the grindstone, whatever that means, that everything falls into place. And I had been successful. I had just about everything. I had a beautiful family, and we had a house in the hills in Austin, and 2 cars, and the whole thing, and I was miserable. My work made me miserable. I was empty inside, and I had started going to this Presbyterian church, and I'd sit on the back pew. Don't ever sit on the back pew when you go to church. That's where God works. And I sit on the back pew and wait for the children to get out of Sunday school. And this Texan, this pastor, Carl Eaton was his name. He had a gravelly Texas voice, and he always talked about grace. He talked about grace over and over and over and over. And what he said was that you can't earn it. It's free. It's a free gift. And I thought about my life. I had earned everything in my life, or I felt like I had to earn everything in my life. And one day that just took root in my heart, and I had a very transforming kind of spiritual experience, and it changed my life, in a lot of ways. It didn't change my life in every way, but I had a different direction all of a sudden. And I went to Carl Eaton and I said, I don't know what's happened to me, but you had something to do with it. You got to tell me what to do with this. And the first thing he said was, whatever you do, don't go to seminary. He said, as long as anything else will satisfy you, don't go to seminary. So I got promoted back to the home office, and we went back to Pennsylvania, and I worked 5 years trying to figure out what God wanted for me and what this was all about in my life. And I finally got to a point where nothing else would satisfy me but to go into the ministry. And so I got on a plane and flew out to Texas and found Carl. He was retired then, and I said, Carl, nothing else will satisfy me. He said, well, you probably ought to go to seminary. So that was a blessing I needed to go. And we lived in Pennsylvania, and I commuted to Princeton for 3 years.
Really?
And so that was quite a time.
That 5-year period must have been, in some ways, traumatic, looking at the possibility of giving up everything that you had worked for and earned and almost really starting all over again.
Absolutely. It was like dropping a bomb in my family. We had one in high school, a kid in high school, and Sally, you were in the middle school, and we had somebody in the elementary school. And so we went from a large salary to no salary. But Princeton was good. They didn't charge me to go to school there. And we were able to cobble things together. Sebring went to work and worked 3 jobs at one time. So it was a very stressful time.
Had to be.
But we made it.
How long a period of time in there, from the time you ended your career at Merck and went to school and ended up with your doctorate? Was there a period of time in between after you got your master's?
I got my master's in 3 years, and then I started working in churches, and I got my doctorate later. It was about 5 years I worked on that, but it was the kind of program where I could be in a church and do the work at the same time. So
obviously the family was very supportive. Your wife Sebring was very supportive.
She's still here.
Yeah. She's sitting right out in front of us here tonight. Tell us about your life as a minister. Obviously, you were looking for something that your career in pharmaceuticals didn't fulfill. Tell us about how you felt about that, but also what you were doing through that period of time.
Okay, we left Princeton and went to Oklahoma, to the suburbs of Oklahoma City. And I was in a medium to large size church, and most people graduating from seminary do youth ministry, but they offered me, since I was older, I was 40 then, and they offered me a job doing adult ministry. And so I did adult education, and that worked okay for about 5 years. And then I was in 2 churches in Georgia. And after that, I went to back to Columbia Seminary, and was director of the spirituality program there for the last 4 years that I worked. And then I retired to Brevard.
When was that?
2010?
2010.
Yeah,
Okay.
2010.
All right. So 12 years ago.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it. Gosh.
It goes fast.
It goes fast, doesn't it? But I had a good ministry. I found the church very difficult, very, very difficult to work in.
That particular church, or just working in a
Churches.
church? Okay, tell us about that. Why?
Well, you're not a person in a church. You're a figurehead or something. You are treated with like people will put you on a pedestal. They project there's a lot of projection in that, and then there's just the church arguments and fights and controversy and all of that kind of stuff. And so it's a difficult institution to work in.
I have a number of friends who are retired ministers, and they've all said the same thing. In fact, I've interviewed two of them here in this series.
Mm.
And I was a teacher, and I think you have to play a role. Mm-hmm. And you're kind of stuck in a very confining role in many ways in terms of what people expect from you and also expect not from you. Did you find that to be true?
Yes, I did. I was in, let's see, we went from Oklahoma to Cartersville, Georgia, and in Cartersville is when the Depression caught up with me, and I left that church, and Sebring and I went to the mountains for 9 months, and little sabbatical or exile, whatever. And then I went to a smaller church, and I just, with the illness that I had, I just didn't think I could handle the administration in the larger church. And so what that did was it opened up a whole new future for me, because I had time to go to the seminary and work on my doctorate, and then the dissertation became a book, and I had time to do that, and they were very generous and gave me space to go and speak and travel and do those things. And so going to the smaller church was really, really good for me. And I guess my proudest moments for work in the church was in Commerce, Jackson County. I was a founding president of 2 Boys and Girls Clubs, and I had never been able to do anything like that, to take a leadership role like that before. And I had just a really strong ministry with the African American community, so I felt really good about that. Those are my highlights, I think, for those years.
I'm guessing that's what you were really looking for when you entered the ministry? Was that kind of an experience?
I didn't know. I didn't know. I didn't know what it was like or what it was about, really.
Well, you mentioned your depression, and really that's kind of the heart of what we're talking about tonight. So that's certainly a subject that is gaining more and more attention today. A lot of attention in our local schools. We've had 3 suicides in the last year and a half. And according to the National Institute of Mental Health, major depressive disorder affects 17.3 million adult Americans in a given year. 1.3 million children ages 3 to 17 have diagnosed depression. And of course, that means that there are many more whose depression is undiagnosed. And we have no idea how many that might be. Despite this, there's still a great deal of stigma surrounding the subject of depression, and many are reluctant to discuss or even admit to it. You've been very open about your own struggles with depression. What was it that made you willing to talk publicly about these struggles, and was it difficult to open up?
Oh, yes, it was very difficult. When I was writing my dissertation in the doctoral program, my classmates kept asking me, what are you writing about? What are you writing about? And I'd just say, well, I haven't decided yet, or mumble something, because I didn't want to tell them I was writing about the spiritual aspects of depression, because I figured the next question would be, why? And then I would have to say that, well, I'm doing it because I suffered from depression. But nobody ever asked me that question. Everybody reacted exactly the same way. They looked at me at kind of askance, and then that told me a story about their depression or somebody they knew and loved who was depressed, and it was that way all the way through. And I realized that I had hit a nerve, that there was a deep mine of treasure there underneath the ground that needed to come up and be seen. So the stigma still exists. That was one of the biggest things that we had to fight in our ministry. We had people that would come to a program and not go in the door because they were afraid somebody would see them. You know, they didn't want, were very reticent about that. But once I go to a church or an organization, I'd talk about it, then it just opened up. It was like the sky opened, and people started talking about their depression and telling their stories, and you just had to give them permission to talk about it. And that's the key to moving ahead, is being able to talk about it. And so I talked to a therapist for 3 years. So I talked about it a lot, and then in the seminars that I did, I talked about it a lot. But it was very rewarding. Publishing this little book really changed my life and my ministry, because all of a sudden I was doing things that I never dreamed I'd be doing. And I was helping people that I never dreamed I'd be able to help, just in talking to them about depression. And the big myths about depression is you're lazy or you don't have enough faith. And when they see me talking about that on the stage, they'd say, well, he's a pastor, he must have some faith. And he doesn't seem like a lazy person. He wrote a book, and lazy people don't write books, and so that broke down a lot of the myth and stigma, just in that way, and that was good. That was good.
The really sad thing about all of this is that people are so afraid to share their personal experience or their personal pain for fear of judgment, just like you said, lazy, whatever it happens to be. And so it keeps them isolated. And by talking, and I've seen this work in other areas similar to this, one person opens up and says, this happened to me, and suddenly other people come in and say, oh my God, it happened to me too.
Yeah.
And suddenly they're not alone anymore.
Yeah, that's the way it works.
I just went to a program last week here in the area on substance misuse. And there were two women there who shared their stories. They had both lost children to substance misuse, died of overdoses, both of them. And they decided that they would not keep silent, as most parents do. And they would share. And they're now counseling other people and They shared their story, and it's just amazing how healing that is for the people that hear it and say, I've been there. I was there too. I know what it's like. So
it's amazing how it works.
When did you first have the symptoms of depression, and how long did it take you to
that's a good
really
question.
confront it?
The first sign was I did a very sad and distressing funeral. It was a 3-year-old boy who was in our program at our church, and he had spina bifida. And one night he just stopped breathing. And I did the funeral, and the parents were not people of faith. They were so distressed, there was just no hope for them. And during the service, they were drinking vodka and taking Valium. I mean, it just tore me up. And the next day, I'm in my study reflecting on that, and I started crying, and I couldn't stop. And so I called Laurie Johnson, who I just met. She was a counselor, just moved to town, and said, I need some help. And so we started counseling like in April. But I wouldn't admit to the depression. She kept bringing it up. I wouldn't admit it until August. And in August, Sebring and I were at the church for a meeting, and she left before I did, and I had to stay and close up the church. Some pastors don't have to do that, but I always had to close up the church. So she left and went on, so I headed home, and it was a dark night, but the night was just set on fire with these red and blue lights just flashing everywhere. And it was a wreck. It was an automobile accident. And there was a car that had been hit like over here, and it went in a ditch just about like that. And my only concern was getting around the wreck. And they finally waved me around, and I got home, and Sebring wasn't there. And I got very confused. You spend a lot of time in confusion when you're depressed, but I was really confused. And then I thought, could that have been her car? And so I found her at the scene of the accident, standing on the yard, in a yard, adjoining yard, and covered with blood. And so I went to her, and we talked, the med techs told us that these were all superficial wounds, that she'd be okay, to take her to the emergency room and get her patched up, and the bleeding was not anything to be really concerned about. So we did that, and she had an abrasion on one eye, and they had to treat that, but she had glass in her hair and in her clothes and everywhere. And so we went home after the emergency room, and she was going to be okay, but I wasn't, because I realized that all through that experience, I felt absolutely nothing. No panic, no pain, no fear, nothing. I felt nothing. And I knew that I was dead inside, that I was depressed. And by coming to terms with that, I was able to start getting treatment, and I was able to begin turning the corner. I continued with talk therapy. I took medications that my doctor gave me, and I would go to the monastery once a month with my mentor, and we would pray the Psalms, and they gave me hope. And that's what this is all about. It's not really about depression. It's about hope that comes on the other side of the depression or in the middle of the depression. It's about hope. And so that's how it took me from April to August to accept the fact that I was depressed. And so, does that answer your question?
It does. There's in the conclusion to your book, and I was going to save this for later, but I think this is a really good time to do it. I marked a section of this, and would you like to read it and then tell us about it?
Yeah, I'll read it. I ought to be able to read it, and I wrote it. Well, it's about Laura Johnson, my counselor. She helped me come to the conclusion that I had this dread illness, and then began helping me to rework my life story, feelings, relationships, guilt, and sin. Nothing was safe from her. In her pushing and inviting, I finally came to better understand myself. We attacked the illusions and the false self that I had spent a lifetime building up. She said depression is like a warning light on the dashboard of a car. When it comes on, you check the engine and other parts of the car because something is wrong. She taught me to feel, but I had to deal with all the stored up feelings, a lifetime of them. I had to grieve the losses in my life. I had never grieved them, just put them in a storehouse. Now the door had been blown off the storehouse and everything came out. Over time, I learned to look at things differently. I learned that I was my biggest enemy in the way I dealt with myself and others. I undermined my own self-esteem, got things out of perspective, took things in a personal way, and gave myself false, negative feedback. So,
Thank you.
I learned a lot from Laura Johnson. She turned my life upside down, but God bless her. She helped me so much.
What I hear in that is that there was a lot of repressed pain in your life.
Yes.
That you had pushed down, and it was coming out in the depression. I just finished a book called The Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah.
By Bessel van der Kolk, and it was written in 2015, and it really goes into this in great detail, not just the idea of it, but how it works in our brain, how it changes our brain, how it changes us physically, and how much of this comes out in physical issues. And
It works the same way in depression.
It takes a great deal of work and effort to confront those things, the things that you've repressed. How long did it take for you to really work on this and process those things?
Well, I'm still processing those things. I think I worked with her for 3 years, and then we moved away, or she moved away, and one of the most painful things about depression, I mean, other than the push down feeling and the loss of energy and appetite and all that kind of stuff, is the self-rejection that you have. You turn it all against yourself. You undermine yourself. You treat yourself very badly, not very in a healthy way, and that's one of the hardest things to deal with, I think, in the depression. But all this is important because you work through some of these things and you begin to see a new light, a new way of life, and all the things that I did helped me with that. I think if I had anything to say to people with depression is don't try to do it alone. Don't try to fight this monster by yourself. Talk to somebody, and use all the resources that you can find. Medical, psychological, spiritual, relational. And watch out for isolation. When you get depressed, you don't want to see anybody. You want to isolate. And I'm very concerned about the isolation that we've all had and experienced with COVID, because that's just feeds into depression, that isolation. So, but it's a very painful. That's the most painful time of my life. And Sebring was a trooper. She kept me together through that, but she was very smart. She let me have responsibility for my illness. She didn't call and make my doctor's appointments for me or get my medicine. She let me take responsibility for that. And that was very important in my healing. So,
Do you think you would have been as successful had you not had the experience growing up of doing the work and finishing?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
Because it takes a lot of work.
It takes a lot of work. I would go see Laurie Johnson once a week, and I'd come out and I'd feel like I'd been in a prize fight. I'd feel like I'd been beaten up by George Foreman. So it was a very painful process.
What part did medication play in this? Because there's certainly, in some people at least, a chemical component
Yes.
of all of this.
Yeah, and I should say that when I'm talking about depression tonight and in the book, I'm talking about primarily major depression, or what's the other word for it? Sally, what's the other word for it?
Like dysthymia?
No,
Clinical depression?
clinical depression, yeah. It's a depression that usually they think you have some chemical imbalance. But anyway, let's see, where were we going with that? What was the question?
Well, just how medication.
Oh,
what
yeah.
part medication played in dealing with all of this.
Well, I had a great doctor, and he put me on antidepressants, and I had adverse reactions to every one that I took. I would get better, and then I'd have to stop, and then I'd get worse. But I also had discovered that I had a sleep disorder, which probably contributed a lot to the depression, because
You weren't sleeping.
I didn't sleep for a couple of years. And so the medication, I finally found a psychiatrist who knew enough about medication, those kind of medications, that he could say to me, I know what's wrong with you. None of these are going to work. I got something different. And he put me on Wellbutrin, which works by a different pathway than the serotonin pathway that most of the others work by. So that helped me, and I still take it today. I'm afraid to stop.
So you're still struggling with depression today?
No, but I don't want to struggle with depression.
Okay.
So it's a slippery slope.
Well, talking about medication, you highlighted one of the real problems with any kind of medication, but especially with medication that deals with mental issues, that it sometimes takes a long time to work out the right medicines and the right dosages and all of that. And sometimes the body changes over time, and what worked a year ago doesn't work today. Isn't that right?
That's true. That's true.
Let's talk about your book.
Okay.
In 2002, you published Finding God, Praying the Psalms in Times of Depression. Much of it is obviously devoted to your own struggle, and it's a very very revealing and very honest book. I'll have to say.
Thank you.
You are very open about your own struggles with it, and also it's a good educational book because it talks about different kinds of depression and what you need to do and how you respond to it. But I'm interested in the idea of praying the Psalms.
Okay.
Why the Psalms? And most people know the 23rd Psalm, and maybe one or two others, but this goes way beyond those.
The Psalms are the prayer book of Israel. It's the Hebrew song book, prayer book, and they contain every human emotion that anybody could experience. And I've worked with the Psalms of lament, and a lament is a cry for help when you trust God to come and help you. It's not like a dirge which just goes on and on. So the Psalm of Lament has a very special structure, and you can look at many of them, and they'll work the same way. They begin with a complaint, and the Hebrews didn't hold anything back. They would really let God know what was wrong, and then they ask for help, and then the psalm shifts in tone. It goes from anger and despair to singing and praise. So it ends up with singing and praise. And I found in that a model of healing. And so I would pray those over and over. The good thing about it is when you can't pray, they're already there. You just have to open your Bible and go to the Psalms, and you can read them like a prayer. And they gave me hope.
I'm sensing here that it was almost like talking to somebody today and connecting with them in the sense that I've been there, you've been there. You're somebody that lived 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, but is expressing the same experience that you're having right now.
Exactly. They've been there. They know what we know, or they knew what we know now, and experienced many of the same feelings, and expressed those very openly, which is something we don't do generally. But the Psalms kind of push you into that. And there are many different kinds of Psalms, and you can pray any of the Psalms, but there are Thanksgiving Psalms and royal Psalms and all different kinds. But the laments are the ones where Israel poured out its heart to God and asked for help and seemed to get some kind of response.
Is there one particular psalm that sticks out in your mind?
Yes. Psalm 13.
Okay.
Can I read it?
Sure.
Psalm 13 is the model psalm of lament. Okay, it goes like this. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I bear pain in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all day long? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death. And my enemy will say, I have prevailed. My foes will rejoice because I am shaken. But I trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. You see the shift? Goes from how long to I trusted.
And that's the hope.
Yes, that's the hope.
What about people who profess no faith in God?
Who do what?
Who profess no faith in God, or who have a very, very weak faith, can they benefit from this?
I think so. The Psalms could serve as catharsis, and you don't have to have faith to have catharsis. There are several theories about why these work the way they do, and catharsis is one of the theories. The other is that during the psalm, the priest would chant a salvation oracle, and everybody would feel better. But for me, I think that something happens spiritually with you, and I believe that very strongly.
You spent some time going around the country with this book and leading seminars and so on. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh gosh, that was a trip.
Many trips, I guess, huh?
A lot of trips. We would Sebring always went with me. We would start on Friday night and do an introduction, and then all day Saturday, and then Saturday afternoon, and that's where the book would sell. I could take some books with me, and people would buy them when I talked about them. But I remember one in Pennsylvania. Sally helped me with some. She's a clinical psychologist, and she helped me with some not tests, but evaluation tools. And so we gave it to them before we began, and then we gave it to them at the end of the seminar, and it was on hopelessness. And it measured the amount of hopelessness there was in the group. And we found that there was a significant amount of increased hope at the end of the seminar than at the beginning.
Just over the space of a day and an evening.
Yeah, that was really powerful. We went. I remember one down in South Carolina. We on Friday night. We had two people who came and told us they were suicidal. Just in the introduction part of the program, and so it touched a lot of lives. It really did. In Pennsylvania, we had somebody was hospitalized that was in our program because they were just really coming apart.
And they realized that through the seminar?
Yeah.
I assume most of these were in churches.
Churches. The funniest one I did was for the retreat, the teachers, the staff retreat for the county school program, and I talked about it, and then we had lunch, and I stayed for lunch, and we were at tables of 8, and before we finished our lunch, everybody at that table had said what antidepressant they were taking. That was amazing. It blew my mind. I thought, I'm the only one taking an antidepressant. No, every one of us were taking them. So.
How long did you do this? How long did you go around the country doing these seminars?
To say go around the country is probably more than it really was. I mean, it was a lot of local stuff and some long trips. But I did that until I went to Columbia to work, and I had to stop when I went to Columbia.
What did you do at Columbia when you went?
I was director of the spirituality program. It was a program where I had done my doctorate, and my mentor had started this way back there, and I'd studied in that program, and then I was able to kind of keep alive what he had started, and I felt really good about that. But after 4 years, it was time to come home.
Is that where you retired from?
Yeah, I retired from there. Yeah.
Well, several years ago, you worked right here in Brevard with Reverend Bob Field when he founded the Center for Spiritual Wisdom. Tell us about the center and what it's about and your involvement there.
Well, that's an amazing thing that's happened here. Rob was the pastor was the priest at the Episcopal Church, and for 18 years, and he kept dreaming this dream of having a place where people could come and study spirituality and grow in their spiritual lives. And so when we came here, we started going to that church, and Rob and I realized right away we shared a lot of the same interest, and so I was his encourager. I was his cheerleader.
Everybody needs one of
I
those.
cheered him on, and I've done some teaching there, and I'm still doing some teaching there. But it's amazing what's happened. It's been open now for 4 years, I think, and it's a nonprofit, and you wouldn't think that a nonprofit about spirituality would make it in a town this size, but it's
Are people
done
coming
well.
in from other places as well?
Yeah, people come in from other places, and there's a very deep, a very large number of people in this area that are interested in this. And Rob has done a lot of very creative things and brought different speakers and different teachers in, and he's very non-exclusive. I mean, he's inclusive. He teaches the world religions over at the college, and so he's brought a lot of that into our program. So right now, I'm not doing a lot of teaching. I'm working on I have a program that I do on prayer, and I do that in churches, and I'm working on one on monastic spirituality that I'll help with. I won't be the lead person on that. And my primary interest is something I call eco-spirituality. And I've worked on that for 4 years and have written 2 or 3 programs, and I just can't get it to work right for me. But I'm going to keep trying until I am able to put that out there, because it's where we are as a people. We are so very interested in the environment and nature, and I got a double dose of that growing up. We were very close to the land, and the trees were very important, and they still are, but they're cutting them so fast down where I grew up. It's sad, but so I'm still working on the eco-spirituality.
How does the center work? Are there different courses a person can take?
Yeah, I'm sorry. the website gives you all the information about it, and it's just Center for Spiritual Wisdom, and there are courses that are available. I noticed that we have one on forgiveness right now, and there's a one that does movies and that have meaning, a depth of meaning. So there are all kinds of different things going on. But all you have to do is go to the website and you can find out what's going on.
Okay. You told me a story just very recently about a woman that was suicidal. And would you share that story with us?
Oh my goodness. Yes, I will. This woman came to me. I was in Cartersville.
So that would be how long ago?
I was in Cartersville in 95 to 2000. Oh yeah, early 90s. In the early 90s she came. She came to me and I worked with her, and she was suicidal, and we worked through that, and I did a funeral for her cat. That was a different thing for me to do. That was a different thing. But I was getting ready to leave there, and I said to her, I'll make a contract with you. We'll have a deal. You agree never to kill yourself without calling me first. And she thought about that, I think for a couple of weeks, and then she came back and said, okay, I'll agree to that. So I was sitting in my office in Commerce some 10 years later, and the phone rang, and it was this woman, and she said, I'm honoring my commitment. I see a knife over here that looks really inviting, and I'm thinking about killing myself. And so I just about fell out of my chair. But we talked and talked, and then she said, well, I feel better. I'll see you around. And I haven't talked to her since. But I think that's a good thing to have as kind of a little deal with people, to have them talk to you before they do anything that they can't take back.
Yeah. Tom Lewis, it's been a real pleasure
thank
talking
you.
to you tonight. And
it's been my pleasure.
thank you for sharing your experience, and I know that there are many people who you put on the path to healing just by sharing your own story.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's been a real good experience for me to be here.
I'd like to thank Catherine Burley and Doug Wilkes, who do our sound, along with all of you who have joined us this evening. We hope you'll join us again soon for our next installment of our author series here at UUTC. I'm Jim Hardy. Good night.